Hello everyone and welcome to the Innovation Oz Capability Forum. My name's James Riley. I'm the editorial director of innovationoz.com. Before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're hosting this event from, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. To start, Chief Defence Scientist Professor Tanya Munro can unfortunately no longer attend today's panel. She has some last minute urgent requirements in the department and sends her apologies. Coming up, I'll be speaking with Ambassador Arthur Sinodinos and we'll be discussing the new AUKUS Pact and the impact of foreign technology and managing Australia's strategic capability uplift. Following the remarks from the Ambassador, Innovation Oz publisher Corey Mcleod will be speaking with Michelle Simmons, the celebrated physicist and CEO of Silicon Quantum Computing, and Rear Admiral Lee Goddard, who's now Head of Partnerships and Operations at the Minderoo Foundation. They'll be talking about ambition, ecosystems, and future industries. South Australian Premier Stephen Marshall will also be joining us to discuss Adelaide's role at the heart of Australia's maritime production industry, and he'll be talking about his government, how his government will work to maximise Australia's role in the SUBS program. This will be followed by a panel about opportunities for growth with Verizon Regional Vice President Rob Labusk, Metz Ignited Chief Executive Adrian Beer, and the Managing Director of the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, Jens Gernemann. First up, I'd like to introduce the Australian Ambassador to the United States, Arthur Sinodinos. Ambassador, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, James. Great to be with you.
Okay, let's get started. Prior to the AUKUS announcement in September, the Australia-US-UK Pact, Australia already had a submarine procurement arrangement with the French. That deal came loaded with industry development opportunities for Australia. There were local content requirements and technology transfer provisions. So, how does this new arrangement differ with the US and the UK? Leaving aside nuclear propulsion technology for a minute, why is this submarine deal with the US and UK more interesting than the last? And specifically, where do you see more or better opportunities?
Thanks, James. Look, I think apart from nuclear propulsion, what's obviously important about this deal is that our strategic circumstances have changed. So there were issues around stealth, endurance, length of stay in the water and all the rest of it that were important in working out what we should now do because of those changed strategic circumstances. And it brings with it, obviously, new technological challenges because clearly it's nuclear propelled. So some of the staffing and the technical requirements, particularly in terms of the Navy, will be different to what they were before. And that has a flow-on effect in terms of the sort of technical personnel that will be required, the skills that they're going to be uploading, and the impact of that tech transfer on the economy more generally. The intention is that the subs be built in Adelaide to a clear design reflecting the scale and complexity that we're able to handle. The stewardship arrangements which are required to be able to look after these subs in themselves will require high-level technical skills. So all of this, I think, will create challenges that we would not have anticipated 5 or 6 years ago. And I think it will stimulate the economy in various ways. We're talking about very high-tech, smart manufacturing, which will have the sort of impacts that I think were envisaged earlier on as well.
Okay, well let's have a look at some of that technology. These kinds of technology sharing agreements kind of cut both ways, I think, when we're dealing with very large and sophisticated partners like the US and the UK. So we're told the next 12 to 18 months will be a process of scoping the work and nailing down the defence requirements, but we're also surveying existing capabilities here and local inputs. So how do we make sure that the arrangement doesn't lead to that foreign technology rolling over the top of areas where Australia has genuine research expertise? Off the top of my head, I'm thinking quantum computing, remote automation, autonomous robotics, remote sensing, artificial intelligence. So how do we put rails on a program of this magnitude so that that deluge of sophisticated tech sourced from our partners doesn't roll over our own world-class, world-leading research efforts?
One of the things that struck me when the AUKUS agreement was being put together is the focus the Prime Minister had on not just the subs, that was the first element, but also those other capabilities that you identified, areas like AI, machine learning, quantum computing, cyber, undersea capabilities, a whole slew of areas where the Prime Minister envisaged deeper science and technological cooperation with the UK and with the US, the purpose of which was to promote not just cooperation on finished technologies, but co-development of technologies as they evolve. The view was that we had a science and research infrastructure we could bring to the table with which we punch above our weight internationally, and that creates capabilities and areas of comparative advantage. You mentioned quantum, for example. There are exciting developments going on in Australia. You're going to discuss some of those in this webinar. These are all areas where we have strengths we can bring to the table. So it's not going to be a one-way street. There'll be tech transfer from which we learn, and that's always been a benefit of working with foreign partners, particularly close partners like the US and the UK, but we will bring real strengths to the table. If I look at cyber, the developments in cyber in Australia, the regard for our cyber professionals, for our cyber industry overseas, I think there are lots of opportunities, and we'll be able, through the various agreements we strike in some of these areas, to make sure that the best Australian technology is being brought to the table.
Okay, Ambassador, you've been the industry minister in Australia, so you know better than most how difficult it is to design programs that can really pull through Australian IP to a global commercial scale. But this is a genuine opportunity. Defence would argue that this is obviously a submarine acquisition program, but there's others who would say that this is actually a giant sovereign capability technology transfer program of which sophisticated submarines are a byproduct. That's how powerful the sovereign strategic capability building opportunity is. So it's clear defence is a priority here, but as a former industry minister, how do you make sure that Australia gets that full strategic capability benefit?
Well, I think the first thing is by making sure that we recognise the opportunities for tech transfer and how we can capitalise on those opportunities using other arms of industry policy. The sort of environment we've created in Australia in both tax, regulation, what we've done to reform the R&D system, the way in which we've sought to engage universities more closely with industry are all ways in which I think we can bring greater commercialisation incentives to bear on the system. And I think that's going to be important going forward, because with all of this investment going into the defence sector in these various ways, whether subs or non-sub aspects, that's going to create all sorts of opportunities. And within the defence establishment, we've got defence innovation authorities and others who are actively working on how do we, for example, make our SMEs more capable of being part of international supply chains. So it's going to require arms of industry policy working with arms of economic policy to make sure that we're match fit to take advantage of the opportunities. But this is a very big opportunity for Australia, and very few countries get this opportunity. I think certainly the Prime Minister sees this as a way of driving a broader industry and economic transformation, and really, I think, also making the innovation ecosystem in Australia more sustainable.
Okay, I want to ask you now how much influence a program of this scale, this technology pact that came with the project, how much influence can have over adjacent industries? I'm specifically thinking about things like critical minerals and downstream processing, rare earths and this sort of thing, but it might also include semiconductor production.
Look, I think if we look at critical minerals for a sec, the government's just announced $2 billion to put into a loan facility to help Australian projects get off the ground, looking at grant and equity mechanisms as well, because we recognise there's an opportunity here both for critical minerals for defence production, but also critical minerals going into electric vehicles, batteries and magnets, and so on and so forth. And we're talking to the US administration about how we work together, how we create demand for those critical minerals, rare earths, light and heavy metals and the like. And the US Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, is talking about ways in which the US helps to, if you like, engineer demand for many of these products so we create secure supply chains among trusted allies and partners. So for us, critical minerals is a particular opportunity. We also have a working group within the Quad looking at critical and emerging technologies, some of the areas we talked about before. How do we help to determine appropriate standards in those areas? How do we encourage supply chains among trusted partners so that in areas where economics and national security overlap, or you have dual use technologies, how do we ensure that those technologies are not falling into the wrong hands or being used for the wrong purposes? So there's a lot to do, but this is all creating great opportunities for Australian science and technology going forward. Semiconductors and the like, that's something the US is investing in big time, and there's attempts to set up more facilities in places like South Korea and the like. That hasn't really come on the radar in terms of Australia, but there are lots of other areas coming on the radar, and I think the opportunities are really exciting. We've got to have a positive approach about how we create that innovation mindset across the economy to take advantage of those opportunities.
All right, Ambassador, it's been great having you here. I want to finish on one. I guess it has been a touchy subject over decades, but to talk about the nuclear propulsion technology for just a minute. This was a giant step for Australia to go down that path. It was a big step for the US and UK to enable it, swapping out diesel electric for nuclear. So is this the first step towards building a nuclear industry? Is nuclear power generation next?
Look, I think the Prime Minister and others made it clear when we made this announcement, this is about nuclear propulsion. It's not about nuclear weapons. It's not about developing a civil nuclear industry. And I think there was recognition that those are big steps in their own right that would require a lot more consultation with the public than was possible with this AUKUS announcement. So I think that's a separate set of issues. The thing I would say about the Australian government's approach is that we've been very clear that we have very high level non-nuclear non-proliferation credentials. People around the world recognise those credentials, and we'll be doing everything in our power to keep burnishing those credentials and assuring others who may be concerned about this that our activities in this realm will not be encouraging nuclear proliferation.
Right, Ambassador, we'll leave it there. It sounds like you've got a busy few years ahead of you. Thanks very much for joining us today, and I hope you'll be able to catch up on some of the comments of our other guests later in the program.
I'm looking forward to seeing a recording of this, and thank you, James, again for the work you do in promoting Australian innovation.
Thank you. Now let me introduce Innovation Oz publisher, Corey Mcleod, who's going to talk us through the next part of the program.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Ambassador. It's great to hear that view from Washington. Hearing directly from Ambassador Sinodinos about what he's seeing himself from a technology perspective is incredibly valuable. Lee and Michelle, thank you for joining us. Lee, I'm going to start just bringing off some of the comments from the Ambassador. You've also said that the AUKUS Pact is a technology arrangement that represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Australia's sovereign future industries. We heard about some of them from the Ambassador. What are other future industries we should be thinking about?
Well, thanks, Corey, and thanks to Innovation Australia for including me today. And it's a real honour, of course, to be here with Michelle as well. Look, what we need to make clear, it's not a security alliance, so it's not a security pact. This is a technology transfer and an innovation access and transfer arrangement. It's really exciting. It's a time of innovation for Australia, And this really is a seminal moment as we really assess how we're going to take this opportunity. So some of those technologies that Arthur Sinodinos just spoke about includes quantum, artificial intelligence, robotics, cyber, advanced undersea systems, digital twinning, robotics. These are technologies that Australia not only in some case owns, but we actually are the leader, a global leader. So that's why I highlight it's actually access and a transfer arrangement. Look, out of this, I think the fundamental questions is what do we own? What do we need to collaborate on? And what do we need to access? Because this is about our sovereignty, our security, our prosperity, and delivering next generation technologies to not only our Australian Defence Force, but across our national security system and wider in creating that sense of innovation across the Australian system. And we'll talk about, of course, the ecosystem later on.
Michelle, this is a good place to bring you in. You have a global view of the quantum computing landscape. You've been working on the quantum computing in Australia for 20 years. Yep. Where are we? Where are we in the global landscape?
Yeah, look, I think it's amazing that not many Australians recognise that we are actually world leaders in this. We got in 20 years ago when the field was really transitioning from a theory to an experimental realisation. Over that 20 years, we've developed leadership in actually manufacturing and building hardware here in Australia, and then building the ecosystem around it to actually operate those systems. I think it's the Australian research system for 20 years has invested in centres of excellence, which is unique globally. That 100, 200 people working on a particular project. We now have 6 centres of excellence in Australia where quantum is at the core of it, and we've also looked at unique models of translating that research out of those research centres into companies. And so in that getting government, industry, and universities working together, Australia really takes leadership in the area.
We'll come back a little bit more to the world view on quantum, but that goes to a point around ecosystems. Now, as you've been in the Navy for a long time, you've been 12 months out in the Minderoo Foundation, which is in itself structurally quite, interesting. What have you seen about the ecosystem and bringing together those different parts that can really make change happen?
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Just building on Michelle from quantum, of course, that's exciting. That computing power, when you think about our hypersonics and we're developing Australia, our guided missiles, our digital twinning, it really will unlock our potential. So it's about our not only accessing but our transfer. In terms of the ecosystem, of course, I transferred from a full-time career in the Navy in January. I still, of course, maintain my my other service credentials, but really, what I've seen is the ecosystem isn't just the corporates, isn't just defence, isn't just governments, but of course it's the research sector, it's the innovation sector, it's the venture capital sector. When that ecosystem comes together, they can make impact and do things very quickly, and they can unlock potential. So being in an impact philanthropy, the Minderoo Foundation, the data, the evidence, the talent is actually drawn in because as a collective, you can make change very quickly and you can get to the most innovative technologies, not just here in Australia, but also collaborate globally as well.
I think the idea of being able to change things quickly and mobilise talent, is something that we have an opportunity to take a new view with something like the AUKUS Pact. Michelle, you talk all the time, both locally and internationally, that sense of momentum and the sense of ambition. Just springing off what Lee just said, there's a real opportunity to kind of bring some of this to life with a refreshed view of energy.
There is, and I think one of the things that I'm particularly keen on is that we get Australians really at that high technological edge, with data-intensive industries where they're actually building and creating industries here in Australia. We attract people from all over the world. We've just done a hire. We've got people coming from MIT, from CNRS in France, from all the leading groups, from Microsoft, from Delft, wanting to join us here in Australia. So we've got this incredible momentum where people want to go to where the leadership is, and it's an opportunity for us to actually capitalise that, bring Australian students along with it, and actually create those industries now.
Can I ask another question? I think for many people, quantum has been such a long range, full of potential, but in terms of actually realising its power. Can you give us a sense of where the reality is from an application perspective now? Where will we see its application? What are we really talking about in defence, but also other industries that might be looking to future-proof?
Yeah, look, quantum computing obviously allows you to do calculations much faster than you can with classical. So, literally minutes as opposed to thousands of years. And it comes from that massive parallel compute power. Every industry that has data will need it eventually. And so it's a question of looking at what those applications are now. And if you look at each different sector, you'll see in the defence industry, there's huge numbers, whether it's optimization of their troop supplies and their supply chain management, strategic planning for them. It looks at materials design, whether it's materials for the stealth so that they can protect their aircraft, or new battery designs, all the way through to kind of optimization and artificial intelligence, looking at patterns of behavior, signals in the electromagnetic spectrum. And then finally in defense, you're even looking at code breaking. You know, code breaking is one of the big applications long term where, you know, people can actually see secrets from different countries, you know, and those things are things that protect the infrastructure and the finance systems of those countries. And then if we look at, you know, other industries such as the finance sector, we're working with the Commonwealth Bank. They're looking at optimising their portfolios for their customers, looking at risk analysis, watching how to look at the market itself and predict those trends, all the way through to the telecommunications industry and how you get the signals out and the benefit of all the different people in the world connecting together. So, you know, those industries are now engaging, they're actually funding it here in Australia. And going forward, you know, there's huge potential capability in those applications within the next 5 to 10 years.
So that partnerships with those organisations are really about co-creating solutions. There's so much, I guess, you're working on and understanding the power of quantum that...
Yeah, it's still at that stage where it's the late stage development stage, and looking at what those applications are and building the hardware specifically for the end user applications is really starting to happen. And Australia again got in at the front. We've got 2 big global corporates that sensed this, you know, 5-10 years ago and partnered with us as it was coming along.
I'm going to ask sort of both of you as a question. One of the things that I understand is that whilst we've had this long history with quantum in this country, we're seeing other countries really kind of rapidly developing their own technologies, and that's been a little bit fast tracked by the industries that are able to pull through the application. So Lee, from what you can see now that in this sort of fresh role, but also with your history in the Navy, how does Australia fast track the industry development to pull through some of these emerging technologies? Because ultimately, the faster we can adapt our own technologies, the faster we can grow them and test them and export them.
Yeah, the first thing, let's not self-deter Australia. Let's be restlessly ambitious, because we actually have the talent and we have the history now, especially with quantum, and it's incredibly exciting, the potential. Not only exciting, it's actually critical that we actually drive through what we say we're going to do. That is develop, attract talent and actually really build on the quantum momentum that we have. Look, I think we can't be conservative here. We need to actually take some risks. And actually, and that's okay, because I think sometimes from a military perspective, I know you're very careful with risk, say in the operational environment, but risk is actually opportunity, and I think we've got to take it. I mentioned at the start about what AUKUS means, about own, access, or potentially collaborate. This clearly is an own, and we need to drive it.
That the notion of risk is very interesting. We hear about it, whether it's about venture capital, whether it's about founders failing. Michelle, we've spoken before about, as a scientist, everything's about testing and failing and moving on.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how do we shift that tolerance for, fast failure and taking risks and pushing through? I mean, that's a big cultural question. Are we seeing change? Are we getting there? Are we understanding that failure is okay?
Look, I think it's slow. It is slow in Australia. There's still that sense that you shouldn't fail, but anyone that is a scientist that's building something knows that that's actually inherent to the success. So you have to embrace failure. It's how you learn and how you do things. And I think now Australia's in a position where it really can transition out of those industries. Looking at what's happening, Lee's mentioned it, all the different support sectors that are out there, but actually having government, choosing areas of strategic national importance for national security and economic benefit actually does help that.
And that's sort of they're taking a bold approach to where those...
You've got to be bold and ambitious.
And I think David Peever's now leading a review on behalf of Minister Melissa Price, which is going to look at our innovation, our science and technology and delivering these capabilities. But of course, part of that will be about being bold, taking the risks that we need to actually move through. We obviously will get access to the US system and we'll collaborate and we'll actually transfer things to the US system. But we could look at some of their examples. For example, DARPA, Incotel, other systems already in place in the US that potentially have an opportunity here in Australia, not necessarily to replicate, but look how those systems have actually encouraged innovation and the courage to actually take the risk you need to actually drive next generation capabilities.
And Michelle, going back to sort of global view, you're on the American Physics Society
Division of Quantum Information.
That's one. Widely, globally, do people know, is it well known where we have those capabilities?
Absolutely.
It is.
So so I'm the chair of that society, and I get to see all across the American system, all the way through the quantum computing hardware chain, from software to hardware and applications. And they know Australia has huge talent, so they see us as a pool of talent that they can take information from. So obviously partnering with them is a good way where both sides get the benefit. In areas where we lead, I think we have to get behind it and show that, as I said, even the schemes of bringing researchers and industry and universities and government together together, that is something that the US is still picking up from us. So there are areas where we lead in multiple ways, not just the technology, but the translation of that technology. And I've had lots of people from the US, and John Martinez came to join us from Google, and he said, I wanted to do what you've done here in the US, but it wasn't possible. So, we've got to own it where we lead and not be shy of it, and continue to lead.
It's interesting, you could sometimes argue that in regards to things like quantum, Australia could be small but perfectly formed, and if we're good at that stuff. So, Lee, previously you were part of a New Generation Navy team and Deputy Director of Transformation and Innovation. Just looking at the view of looking at something like transformation and innovation within defence or within the Navy, and all the things we've been talking to now about bold and ambition and harnessing ecosystems. Are things changing, do you think? What was the view then, and what do you think the view is now?
So that program was 10 years ago, and I think when we used the word innovation, we were just working towards a cliche. I think now, 10 years on, we've made significant progress in terms of a mindset. We can talk about cultural change, and in defence, of course, that draws certain focus. But in terms of actually innovation, wider engagement with the wider ecosystem, and understanding that the best answers aren't inside, they're often outside, and how you actually attract those. So New Generation Navy was about a cultural and a leadership program. But actually 10 years later, I'm proud to say you can actually see that the next generation of Australian Defence Force personnel and all our supporting organisations are far more innovative. We're not there yet. And I think we do sometimes self-deter, and we sometimes put our own limitations and our own glass ceilings on things that we potentially can achieve. And I think sometimes security is wrapped around that, and I think we can be much smarter about how we actually bring in others, because the talent set isn't just in Australia. And we've got to attract the best and the brightest from the globe, and and especially on the areas that we are leading. Just one other comment, just a sense of pride as well. As an Australian Defence Force person, it's a real sense of pride when I talk about quantum and hypersonics, digital twinning, and all those technologies that Australia is leading. You'll find Australian Defence Force people when they go around the globe. They're very aware of it and very proud of that as well. And so we really want to take that forward.
So coming back to you, Michelle, where we're at now, so for the next 12, say 24 months, where is Silicon Quantum Computing at as a company? What's the future looking like in the kind of medium term in terms of quantum in this country?
So we're absolutely gunning to build a processor here in Australia. A lot of people think you need a multi-billion-dollar manufacturing industry to build it. We can actually build it here without that. So that's something we're very excited about. But yeah, we're on the mission to build what we call a 10-qubit quantum integrated circuit, our first minimum viable product, about 100 qubits within 5 years, and then to build the industry around it, using literally hardware, software, engineers at every level. It's going to create a whole new transformational computing industry here in Australia.
We've got 2 minutes left, and I just wanted to use it because it's sort of been implied in the conversation we've had today, but the idea of sovereignty. Sovereign capability, what we can have here, where we found some of those, fragile supply chains throughout the COVID pandemic. So, Lee, you'll have seen, sovereign capability obviously is vital to, defence. Where are the areas that that you may have seen even through the work with Minderoo right now from sovereignty that we really need to own? And Michelle, I'll ask you the same question. Quantum's obvious, but will it be others, I'm sure?
So sovereignty is one word. I think self-reliance. And the reality is the strategic situation has changed. So Australia needs to stand up and actually do the things it needs to do to reflect the strategic situation. Of course, our own sovereignty, a sense of pride, and obviously generating innovation and jobs and work for Australians, but also because we need to be self-reliant because the situation has changed. The only thing I'll just end with Minderoo, of course, is this sovereignty and self-reliance means the talent's here, and we're very keen to use much of this technology as dual-use technology. It's not just for defence and national security. We've got to adapt to climate change. We've got to clean up our oceans. We've got to observe certain parts of the world. For example, I search for MH370. I'm looking forward to advanced undersea systems, so we actually can, really discover the Indian Ocean in full. So that dual-use technology opportunity is just terrific.
There's a lot of ambition to be applied to a lot of challenges and opportunities. Michelle, sovereignty from your perspective.
I look at it really from the kind of educational side all the way through to industry. So we've got to get in and support our maths and physics teachers at schools. We've got to bring those through, support the fundamental research at universities so that they can create those technologies, figure out how to translate well, get behind the companies that are out there, strategically picking where we lead and getting behind those corporates. Obviously quantum computing is one of those areas, but I look across Australia, there's many areas where Australia leads, and it's got to identify where they are and accelerate them.
Lee Goddard, Michelle Simmons, an absolute delight to talk to you today. Thank you both so much. I'm now pleased to hand over to the Honourable Stephen Marshall MP, the Premier of South Australia, a state that's played a key role in Australia's submarines program to date.
Thank you, Corrie. We have amazing talent in this country. I'm really glad to be involved in today's discussion. As you would all be aware, last month the Australian Government announced the very exciting news that South Australia will be home to the construction of Australia's first fleet of nuclear-powered submarines. We also secured a pipeline of defence projects through the life of type extension and the full cycle docking of the Collins class that will deliver thousands of jobs for South Australians for decades to come, reaffirming our position as the maritime construction and sustainment capital of the nation. This work is expected to see up to 5,000 South Australians employed in the naval shipbuilding industry by 2030. In addition to the expansion of our shipbuilding capabilities, the new AUKUS agreement will also present important growth opportunities across other defence domains such as information warfare, cyber and systems. With South Australia's Edinburgh precinct established as the nation's centre of intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, the future prospects for local defence industry companies are absolutely booming. The Australian Government's investment in our state's capabilities is a testament to the great skills that we have here in South Australia, and our need for a highly skilled defence workforce will only grow as we scale up to deliver on these exciting projects. Our local defence industry is renowned for its proficiency, adaptability and its strong track record of collaboration and innovation to deliver highly complex projects. South Australia has some of the most experienced shipbuilding and defence workers in the country. It's these workers who will be in demand because of the unprecedented investment in our naval capabilities. However, my government also recognises that for Naval Group Australia and some others in the industry, the cancellation of the Attack Class submarine program is a major shock and lost opportunity. First and foremost, we will work to support those skilled workers to transition into new jobs, ensuring that we retain our highly capable, skilled shipbuilding workforce. I've already met with the heads of major defence industry companies with significant operations in South Australia to discuss how to support the transition of skilled workers and maximise business opportunities for local companies. A dedicated sovereign shipbuilding talent pool is already open, with ASC committed to developing a program to retain our shipbuilding workers. The pathway to nuclear-powered submarine construction becomes clearer over the next 12 to 18 months. During this time, we'll work closely with the Australian Government to ensure the significant investment local industry has already made in capability uplift supports our future programs. South Australia's defence and manufacturing sector is robust, determined, proactive and highly driven. We are home to leading global defence industry companies and a thriving network of SMEs, all dedicated to expanding the sector and increasing our sovereign capability. I have no doubt that the state's highly skilled workforce and defence companies are in the best position to take advantage of the job and business opportunities that lie ahead. The naval project announcements are a huge win for jobs in South Australia and will open the door for local businesses across all tiers to engage and partner with the defence industry sector domestically as well as across the US and the UK. It will see our state secured as the epicentre of Australia's shipbuilding and sustainment industry, providing the capability our Navy and Defence Force need to protect our nation into the future.
Thank you, Premier. It's so exciting to hear about the pipeline of defence projects in South Australia, the capability uplift and the opportunities for South Australia and the rest of Australia across other defence domains. It's my pleasure now to introduce our discussion panel, moderated again by Corey Mcleod. The panel will take a closer look at industry programs, how to fast-track the technology we develop locally, and how we partner strategically to build upon other technologies and industries. On the panel today we have Adrian Beer, who's the Chief Executive of METS Ignited. For those of you who don't know, METS Ignited is one of the industry growth centres, METS being the acronym for Mining Equipment, Technology and Services. He brings extensive experience and expertise in the application of technology derived from the mining sector and taking it into other industries. Rob Labusque is Regional Vice President for Verizon Business Group, responsible for delivering the digital transformation journey of the company's enterprise and government customers across the Asia-Pacific region. He's lived and worked all across Asia. He's a trained classical musician and is a governor of the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia. Jens Gernemann is Managing Director of the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, where he assists manufacturers with the adoption of Industry 4.0 knowledge and increasing competitiveness. Jens spent time in Germany with the former European Aeronautic Defence and Space Company and was in charge of the soldier and parafoil systems within the Defence Division. Okay, over to you, Corey.
Thank you, James. Adrian, Jens and Rob, thank you for joining us today. I'd like to direct the first question to the leads of two of our growth centres. You've had an up-close view of some of those developing countries in some of our areas of competitive advantage. Adrian, starting with you, what are we seeing in terms of the companies in the MET sector, as an example, in terms of their maturity and how they might be participating in a program that AUKUS has led to?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think, we talk about the capability that sits in our research sector and the innovation investment that has been made by all of our major industries, defence, the mining and resources sector. And we talk about realising that capability through commercial channels. So what we've seen over the life of our growth centre is really not only the demand but the supply. So turning that capability into products and services and delivering it to the market is a real change for us here in Australia, and I think a really significant opportunity. Programs like this just provide more of our vendors the capability to supply solutions to these programs and really commercialise that technology capability that we know exists in our research sector.
Okay. The pull through, and we talked a little bit
Absolutely.
about it on the first panel, the industry that will pull through these technologies and iterate, grow them, commercialise them. Jens, what are you seeing? Where are the bright spots from your time leading?
Well, when we started 6 years ago, the question was tabled, do we need manufacturing? And now we, thanks to the work of my team and other factors, manufacturing is back on the map, and that is good. COVID has helped for the right and for the wrong reasons. At the same time, we need to understand that with 47,000 manufacturers in Australia, we lack scale. 85% of our manufacturers employ less than 20 people. What I'm particularly excited about is that manufacturing is not being defined wrongfully as a vertical, as a sector, as a capability, which is our today discussion about the capability, which cuts across all other sectors in which something is being made. Hence, now 6 years in, we have now 6 national, wait for it, manufacturing capabilities, including defense, including space, including pharmaceutical, including medtech. That is good. At the same time, we also need to understand that the ability of making complex things is measured in the Economic Complexity Index. And this is where Australia stands on rank number 86 in the world. So there's a lot to go.
There's a sharp intake of breath there when you realise what we need to do to transition that economy to complexity. And just as a secondary point, when you talk about the time that you've been at the AMGC, has there been a real shift in understanding of advanced manufacturing as opposed to what might have been manufacturing in, say, previous large projects?
Let's drop the advanced. I'm not too amazed about the prefixes, because the advanced manufacturer of today, when she doesn't do anything, she will be the traditional manufacturer of tomorrow. So manufacturing, the view of manufacturing has changed, and we are starting to understand that manufacturing is not about assembling cars from other countries' companies. We understand that just putting something together is only 1 out of 7 steps for manufacturing. And if you take, for example, an iPhone, the assembly of an iPhone, what we traditionally think is manufacturing, it's only 5% of the purchasing price of an iPhone. 95% happens before and after the assembly. Hence, the broader understanding of manufacturing, the broader understanding of making complex things, including but not limiting, just to put it together, that is slowly changing and is a 100-year-old misunderstanding which we are fighting against.
Okay. Rob, coming to you. Well, we've talked about AUKUS and the industry development. We're still picturing submarines, but there really is, a multiplier effect. What are we talking about when we're starting to actually envision the opportunities in terms of industry building?
Well, even when you think about just the submarine capability, that represents a huge multiplier effect for technology and industry in Australia. So if you think about these vessels, they come with hundreds of systems, but even if you just consider the main systems, through the life of that vessel, they all need to be maintained, sustained and upgraded over time. And each one of those systems represents a supply chain and a value chain that can be built out and that can support Australian industry. I'll give you a simple example. It can take twice as long to train a submariner as it does a regular naval officer or naval seaman. And so as a consequence, we start to think, well, what can we do? How can we use technology here to help accelerate that training process for shore-based training? So that's where technologies such as augmented reality, virtual reality, 3D rendering, things of that nature can give us a productivity dividend and get our staff trained more rapidly for the new capability and platform. That's a simple example. But if you imagine all of those aspects of this platform require that support, and every single one of them will be supported and technology will be intrinsic to the way that we deliver that capability. And that's before you even start to think about the second order and third order impacts in the industry across the board. We heard a moment ago that manufacturing is not just the building, it's all of the other elements in that value chain. There's opportunity within all of those for technology providers and creators here in Australia. And that's before we even start to think about the submarine as a platform for other technologies that Lee spoke about earlier, and their ability to deliver new technology and capability more broadly. So there's huge opportunity, and the multiplier effect will be many, many times the actual investment just in the program.
Adrian, I'm going to come to you. Jens talked about economic complexity. The area that you work in has to be the epitome of the way that we look at the weightless exports that we have potential in this country when we talk about all of that innovation that's come off the back of the weighted exports of 30 years. What do we see about those companies? What do they actually look like? And how are they actually applying that, that intellectual property across different sectors, including defence?
So I think we sometimes need to look a little deeper under the covers. We look at the mining companies and the resources companies that have invested a huge amount of money for decades into our research sector to solve what really are some complex challenges. I mean, remote operations, capital intensive industry, energy intensity, it's a complex environment to operate in. And the challenges those industry players are trying to solve for require really sophisticated solutions. So rather than economic complexity, I like to look at it like sophistication. And I think in the past 5 to 6 years, we've seen the sophistication of the economy, which is really the transfer of that research capability into products and services to supply to those end market industries. And in the AUKUS agreement, they talk about interoperability. And I think that's a really important term to understand, because we often talk about interoperability like a technology problem where different systems need to work together, but it's also a commercial problem where different businesses need to work together. And the transfer of technology and innovation out of one area, like research and innovation, or out of the mining sector, can be applied into another industry through a commercial channel. I think that's really going to be one of the key drivers to improve the sophistication of Australia's economy.
I'm just going to just break for a minute and say we will have time for questions. Feel free to put the questions into the chat channel and they'll come through here and we can ask our esteemed panel. Can I ask, Rob, going back to, there's obviously, we're also talking about lots of different things, but in terms of emerging technologies, things like 5G, if we are going to be working more collaboratively in a technology transfer environment, we know that there's lots of case studies of shipbuilding yards that are 5G enabled. Where is Australia at, and where do we need to be to make sure we've got the base level technology?
Well, I think at this stage of the pact and the agreement, it's all about accelerating adoption. So in the United States, in partnership with the Newport News Naval Shipyards, Verizon built the first 5G enabled shipyard manufacturing facility that's been operating for almost 2 years or more than 2 years now. Now, importantly, for this particular project, that is where the Virginia-class submarines are manufactured. It's one of the sites. So we have a deployed technology that is tested in the field, very strong use cases with robust and mature processes and systems already operating. that we can bring to Australia as part of that technology transfer and that enablement that'll allow us to uplift capability really quickly. Those sorts of opportunities is where I think the magic is in the Pact. And more broadly, outside of the submarine investment, the reference to other technology platforms such as quantum computing, cyber and others, all of those have multiplier effects and opportunity for technology transfer and interoperability as well in the fullness of time. So it's not just a single-threaded aspect to the way that we can work together with these new partners. Certainly from a technology perspective, there's opportunity today, but there's a really long runway of investment and opportunity for Australian companies with both-way trade.
Jens, Michelle Simmons said on the first panel talking about focus. Now, you've obviously seen a huge kind of raft of different types of companies, different levels of maturity, technology readiness levels. If you were to apply your pragmatism to this discussion, and I know you will, where do we need to focus when it comes to your area specifically?
Focus is the key for a country of the size of Australia. We are 25 million people. In the global scheme, we are rather small. And as soon as we understand the size or the lack of it, the better we are. And we focus on our strengths. Michelle and the mastery of the technology where she and her team are global leaders is an area of particular strengths. And she utilizes the strengths in international corporations. If we try to do everything a little bit, we achieve nothing. And that's the idea of the growth centers, to say there are areas of particular strengths. This is the idea of national manufacturing priorities. We say we focus on these areas of strengths. And by continue doing that, we will punch above our weight in the areas where it really matters.
I guess it goes back again to boldness around being bold to kind of, focus and decide what will be kind of focused and what won't be. So,
well, we have the task to utilize the project called AUKUS. And every massive defense procurement has three dimensions. A political one in regards to the alliance, and that comes with a very strong alliance. A military one, and this is about the capability to get the job done. And then there's the third one, the industrial one. And the primary goal for the industrial one is to keep, we have the industrial capability to keep the boat floating or submerging in this case, and be able to maintain and upgrade it. So that is the primary goal. And there are knock-on effects where you want to have and sustain an industry which can do that.
I wanted to ask the whole panel about the idea of scale and maturity, because what we often see is we have great technology, great research sector, and then we'll see things disappearing offshore, and then we buy them back, and it's great short term, but really when you talk about that complex economy that we often looking too short term, how do we change that? Like, this is important that we have the ability to grow those companies domestically and continue to serve export markets as opposed to buy them back. What are top thoughts on how we change that dynamic?
I'll kick it off. I think, creating Australia as an economy that's a good place to establish supply. So we've talked about demand, and we've got demand addressed. We talked about the demand of critical minerals. We've talked about the demand for our technologies. We've talked about our research capability. So we've got a capability inherent in our research sector, and that's been built on the back of a demand, sustained demand by those industry priorities that Jens talked about. But really it's making Australia an attractive place to supply against that demand. And I think that's the missing link that we need to address. We've been able to understand what the capabilities are and why they've been created. I think about 5G for an example. Before we had network connectivity in the resources sector, we had a huge amount of technology, huge amount of innovation and edge computing capability. Now all of a sudden we can get access to that data. So bring communications capability and a huge amount of data, we've got this huge opportunity to commercialise that innovation. So for me, making Australia an attractive place to create a supply for those solutions is one of the keys.
And part of the attraction is a large longitudinal investment like this underwrites the risk. It underwrites the risk of capital markets when they assess technology companies that are based here in Australia. So that in and of itself is a significant shift and will create opportunity for them to scale up and access secondary global markets that they don't have access to today. So that's something that I think the tech sector in particular can look forward to with great optimism.
I don't like the notion of saying we had a good idea and somebody bought it off us, as if the buying party is the evil party. We sold it to them.
Yep.
So it is a market mechanism which saw us losing that idea. So it tells me, or it's an evidence for us overemphasizing on early research and underemphasizing on the commercialization of the research. This is why we look at the 9 technology readiness level, and we spend 60% of our R&D money in level 2. And then comes the commercialization valley of death, and this is where, for example, Growth Center and similar initiatives trying to bring it all through and serve a market. Not like a good idea, like a hammer looking for a nail, but asking what is the problem we're trying to solve and support that. And this is why the focus on 6 national manufacturing priority, including submarine, including this long-term, reliable beacon of where to strive towards, is the right way to do, brings us back to focus.
I'm going to talk about measurement, how we measure success. But in an earlier conversation, Rob, you were talking about capital to actually scale, and having these programs are almost underwriting a risk, if you like. I think that's a really interesting notion of being able to be more confident about where sources of capital are coming from. Would that be right?
Definitely, and it gives surety at the very early stages in research and development, commercialisation of technologies. Because when you consider the lifespan of the submarine, of the platform, it's 30 years, sustainment and upgrades, AMPs and other things, all of that requires technology uplift. And so that's where I think one of the secret sauce of the AUKUS Pact is that it doesn't just talk about a defence capability in submarines, it talks about other technology reference points that at their heart are actually platforms. Quantum computing is a platform. There are platforms for cyber ingestion and articulation of threats. These are platforms that can be built on and iteratively developed over time that create a significant uplifting capability as well. So all of those things, once there's surety in investment and surety in development and demand, then there can be greater surety in investment as well.
Okay. I'm going to ask another question, then we'll come to some questions from the audience. Just building on the idea about measurement, both the Growth Centre leads, obviously there's a lot of reporting, and we're always trying to measure across our economy about signal to noise. Inevitably, any pact or any agreement as part of AUKUS will have numbers as part of what local content, for a better word, will look like. We know what we know now. What would we do differently about how we're identifying those things that will actually build capability?
Look, the limited funding for projects we had and the way we applied the funding, I think, is a good example how to create impact. We had less than $20 million for projects. We carefully selected project participants supported by researchers, not run by researchers. Researchers helping solve an industry problem, not the other way around. And out of this $20 million, less than $20 million, we're creating 2,500 jobs and an additional revenue of $1.2 billion. And the difference is that we don't take a grant and throw it against the wall and wait it sticks or not, but we're working with the companies, check homework, check milestone, whether they deliver what they say they would deliver. And that applied to national manufacturing priorities for defense, for the necessary technologies we need to develop and bring the manufacturing ecosystem along the way. That is, for me, the key to a drive capability.
Okay. Adrian?
Metrics are interesting because, as Michelle said earlier, the rest of the world recognises our strength and capability, but we don't. And I think industry is also a confusing term for us here in Australia. We talk about industry as the end markets, the big industrial markets that drive our GDP and our export growth. And so a lot of our investment and support goes into those end market operators. And I think to Jens's point, the investment isn't going into the companies that are really translating the capabilities those end market needs and delivering them not only to Australian businesses but into our international markets. So we've been a shopping ground for research competency for around the world, but we need to come back to how do we make it more attractive for Australian businesses to establish Australia as their home for commercialising technology globally. And so the metrics on performance of the industries that we serve, which is where the majority of our reporting is focused, We actually need to focus more on how many businesses we created, how many jobs we created, and the revenue numbers that we generate. I think Jens' example is a great one of Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, Met's Ignited Growth Centre. We've had the same experience. So small investment, big return, large number of jobs in companies generating revenue and now exporting their products globally.
I'm going to take a question from the audience. This one's sort of double-barreled. Is there a place for building software capability along with hardware? And the second part of that is thoughts on current tax incentives, because that almost goes back to measurement as well, about what value looks like. I'm thinking the R&D tax incentive is an obvious one. Rob?
I can fill the first
Go for
part,
the
which
first one.
is,
To do the second.
you know, when you think about the capability in the platform, it'll create a logarithmic growth in data. All of that data needs to be ingested, it needs to be analysed, it needs to be understood. And you know, a data-first approach to investment from technology, as opposed to a platform-based or a hardware-based approach, is really where the growth and opportunity will be. And that's what will get it done in terms of the data ingestion and understanding. So absolutely, and we're in a good position in Australia because, you know, traditionally we've been very strong in software research and development in this country, which is where the core of the IP sits for a lot of Australian-based tech companies. And so there's that great opportunity to leverage that with hyperscale compute power that's now readily available, with edge compute capabilities, and now with things like next generation, you know, wireless transfer that gives us sub 10 millisecond data transfer rates at ultra high levels. The reality of what can happen either in a shipyard or in a defence environment or a manufacturing environment or another allied industry is really a quantum step forward in both operational capability as well as efficiency and dividends that can pay back for us. So we can look forward to that, and that is not something that'll be 10 years out. We'll start to realise those benefits and those dividends very soon.
I think we forget that we used to be a world leader in software, and it's not actually about an emerging potential opportunity. It's actually one that we lost in the past and we need to learn the lessons from. So the software platforms developed in Australia that run the Australian military, they were developed here in Australia. They run Chilean Navy, they run Network Rail, they run National Grid, you know, they run the LA Bureau of Sanitation. All of these organisations, big industrial processes, operated with software that was developed here in Australia, but it's now owned by overseas companies. So we proved that we can do it, we proved that we can develop it, and we can commercialise it, but we then lose it. And I think the focus is about bringing it back onshore and supporting the businesses that are commercialising those technologies.
I think that's probably a very salient point. We're talking about capability, talking about building it, we're talking about keeping it, we're talking about making sure all the settings are there, that we do keep it and grow it in this market. Jens, did you want to add to comments?
R&D tax incentives are counterintuitive to innovation because they don't focus. You get an R&D tax incentive for an innovation, but the nation needs to decide what are the areas of our strengths. We can't do everything a little bit. We need to focus. And the second thing, an R&D tax incentive is not being paid in advance, but after. So I question the additionality. Would the innovation have happened otherwise anyway? So I think the money can be spent in a sharper way, in a more focused way, counterintuitive to our egalitarian society that everybody should get a little bit. We need to focus and we need to scale, and that I think will do the trick. That is an interesting view. I'm sure it will be a controversial one, but I think it's a good one to be able to discuss. I'm just going to, we've got final thoughts for both Jens and Adrian. The next 12 months or so, looking at your member companies and your stakeholders, what do the opportunities look like, and what do they need to know? And then Rob, I'm going to ask you the same about industry and government and transformation.
So yeah, look, we're in the sort of final stages of our funding period. Our projects are coming to fruition and completion, and we've had a huge amount of success in those projects, and I think we need to do a better job of sharing some of those successes so people understand what those opportunities are. And I think if I could jump back just to the previous comment on R&D tax incentives as well, we also need to highlight that Australian businesses are worth investing in to attract the investment in Australian businesses, because with the tax incentives that we currently have, it's easier to get foreign investment by acquisition to sell your technology and set up overseas than it is to get funding support for commercialising technology in Australia. So really, hopefully in our final 12 months, we can prove that it can be done here, that there is enough demand, there's enough supply, and there's a scale in our local market to commercialise our technology, and if we can achieve that, hopefully we attract more investment into Australia.
Watch this space. Jens.
The Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre was lucky to receive another $30 million from government for the commercialization fund. So we have a bit more runway left. Notwithstanding that, we have handed in our transformation transition plan. We want to be self-sufficient, continue working with government, but in the less dependency. We are short of 4,000 members representing over 200,000 Australian manufacturers. That is a big voice for the transformation, and we're looking for the next 5, 10, 15 years to transform the lucky country into the smart country. Manufacturing is playing a crucial role in that.
It really is. I think it's been a standout in the recent years. Rob, the next 12, 24 months, what are you seeing in terms of the technology landscape?
Oh, well, this investment commitment is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the tech sector in Australia, and they need to grasp it with both hands. It starts at the appropriate policy settings all the way through to industry and investment. But over the next 12 to 24 months, the opportunity directly in front of us is to learn from what those partners are doing in terms of technology adoption and deployment overseas, and use that to scale up our capability quickly. It feels like it's going to be a long time, but actually it will pass very quickly. And so we need to start today. And it starts not only at industry, it starts, as Michelle mentioned, at the education level, making sure that we've got those supporting infrastructures in place now, because the opportunity is once in a generation, but it will last a generation. And so the plans that we put in place today need to be plans that contemplate what that future will look like.
A beautiful place to leave this discussion. Thank you, Adrian, Rob and Jens. Thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed this chat. I'm pleased to hand back to you, James, to wrap up.
Thanks, Corey. I'd now sincerely like to thank all the forum participants for your insights today. It's been a real privilege to talk to you. It's been great to have heard the views from Washington, from South Australia, from the technologists and from the industry experts driving this. We wanted to take this opportunity to bring together these amazing people to share their experience. Obviously, programs like the submarine build don't happen overnight, but they do always benefit from quality dialogue early on in the process. So thank you once again to our panelists and to the attendees listening and watching, and an extra thank you to Verizon Business Group, whose support has made this possible. A reminder to the audience that the recording of this forum will shortly be available to watch on demand on the Innovation Oz website. We look forward to seeing you next time.